Hello, my name is Fred Hadley, and I'm the publisher of the Village Sentry, an email newsletter that goes out to over 1,250 families in Sentry Village, Boca Raton, which is an over 55 active adult community in West Boca Raton on Lyons Road and Yamato Road. And we are about to have a conversation with Michael Weinstein. He is a candidate for House District 81, which is a seat that is currently held by Representative Tina Polsky, who is running for Senate District 29. So that means this is an open seat, and Michael is a candidate, having qualified by June 12th with the Palm Beach County elections. By the way, just a note on the election, the primary is August 18th, I believe, right? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. And there are three ways to vote, as always. You can either vote at your local polling place on the 18th, but because of COVID, a lot of people are going to be voting by mail. To vote by mail, you need to get a vote by mail ballot. There's still plenty of time. The phone number of the Palm Beach County Elections Commissioner is 561-656-6200. And you can request a vote by mail ballot. They're using that expression. They got away from absentee ballot because of the stigma. The other way to vote would be early voting, which will be starting approximately 2 weeks before the August primary. Under early voting, you can vote at any polling place in Palm Beach County. You don't have to go to your local place. Okay. Good morning, Mike Weinstein. How are you?
Good morning, Fred. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I want to thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview. We're going to be posting this in about a week or so on social media to try to get you better known in this district. So the first question is, have you ever run for elected office before?
Well, the first time I ever ran for elected office was actually at the University of Florida, where I was elected as a student body senator. And that's a campus of 40,000 individuals. That was a campus to the Student Bar Association, 3 years running as a first year, second year, and third year student. So I've won elected office before, but not as a politician. This is my first political run, but I'm pretty comfortable doing it.
Okay. Tell us why you're running. Why this race? Why this year? What motivated you to declare yourself a candidate?
Well, I have a lifetime of service and a family history of democratic politics. Let me just start back. My grandfather, Moses Weinstein, may be known to some of your residents. Moses Weinstein was the Speaker of the New York State Assembly in the 60s. He was acting governor during Rockefeller's administration. He was a Democrat, but he had to take over from time to time. And my uncle Jerry was a state senator from Queens. And my father was the majority leader of the state Senate here in Florida. So I come from a family of service. I served the community as an assistant state attorney, where I was prosecuting individuals charged with very serious crimes, including murder and other burglaries and very serious crimes. So I gave back to the community as an assistant state attorney. Currently, I represent individuals who are charged with crimes, and I try to defend their rights as best as I can. So I've got a long history in both student government, in family history, and political history, and service to the community.
Okay, fine. Now, I'm sure you're aware that this job pays only $29,697 annually. According to press reports, you've raised already approximately $50,000, of which $35,000 were loans by you to your campaign. Is that about right?
Actually, as of today, we're going to be over the 60,000 mark.
Sure.
We have over 60 individual donors who have been great. These are just grassroots at this point, family and friends and people I've known my whole life. I believe the next step would be to continue the fundraising effort during COVID, because we have to use means like this, like social media and video interviews, to get our name out. And we have to also get our mailers out so to let the voters know who we are.
Okay, very good. Now, sometimes these races get out of control. I know several years ago, another candidate put about $2 million, bought a lot of TV airtime. I think you probably know who I'm referring to, but we don't want to mention the candidate's name at this time. What is it about this job that a person would spend literally a small fortune to get elected for something that's only a 2-year term? And it's also, as a Democrat, very frustrating. You can't really get much done because you're outnumbered up in Tallahassee. What motivates you or others, you suppose, to put this kind of money into something that only pays $29,700 a year?
Because I want to serve. I want to serve. I want to serve the public. I have a very successful law practice. I practice in the Tri-County area. I've been practicing law for 22 years. I'm Florida Bar Board certified in trial law. This is what I do every single day, and I run a successful practice. You know, I'm a husband, I'm a father. I have a 9-year-old who goes to Whispering Pines Elementary School, which is literally right down the street from Sentry Village, as you know. I live right down the street from Sentry Village, right on Lyons and Clintmore. I mean, I'm right down the street from you. And I have the ability to serve my community. Nobody does this for the $29,000. They do it because they want to give back. And this is my way of giving back.
Okay, good answer. Now, in the Democratic primary, which again is August 18th, you were running against Kelly Skidmore. She has got 4 years experience in the legislature. I think she served from 2006 through 2010 as a state representative. So she's got a fair amount of experience, 2 terms up in Tallahassee. What makes you better qualified than somebody that's already done the job successfully, I presume, for 4 years?
So let me start by this. I'm a litigator, and that means that I go into court every single day and I fight for my clients. My opponent, who does not live in the district, I think that's important. Your readership and your viewers need to know that Florida law allows you to run outside of the district anywhere in the state as long as you decide to move into the district if you win. So, for example, myself, I live in District 81. I built a house with my wife and my daughter back in 2015, as I mentioned earlier, and Clintmore and Lyons. We're here to stay. We live in the district. I don't need to move into the district. That's number one. The second thing is you mentioned that my opponent has legislative experience. Let's talk about that for a second. Back over a decade ago, she was in the legislature in a different district. And it's my understanding that during her time there, not a single bill was passed by her, not one bill. And that tells me that you need to be able to work, as you mentioned earlier, you need to work with both parties to get things done in this particular state. I have the ability to cross over and work with both sides. I am a lifelong Democrat. I believe in our core democratic values. I believe in the assault weapons ban. I believe in pro-choice. I believe in funding for our seniors. I believe in Medicaid and Medicare expansion. So those core democratic values I believe in. But I also am willing to work across the aisle if necessary to get things done. And that's what makes me different.
Okay. Now, let's talk about endorsements for a moment. Now, a lot of people say endorsements are just window dressing. They don't really influence the voters. But so far, your opponent, Kelly Skidmore, has been endorsed by former U.S. Representative Ron Klein, State Representative Joe Casello, and Matt Wilhite, Palm Beach County Tax Collector Ann Gannon, Palm Beach County Commissioner Mary Lou Berger, and Palm Beach County School Board Member Karen Brill. Also, Ruth Slitz has endorsed her, and former Senator Joe Abruzzo, who is now the county clerk-elect of Palm Beach County, nobody having opposed him. Why do you suppose, well, first of all, tell us who's endorsing you right now, and why do you suppose so many, shall we say, established names in the Florida, South Florida politics are endorsing your opponent?
I think that's a great question. First of all, I have three major endorsements on the horizon. And when I say major, I mean major, but I can't announce them publicly yet because I'm working on their confirmation. So if maybe we can discuss this in a day or two, but I'll be working on three major endorsements. And I mean at the highest level. That's number one. Number two, I have a long history in my family of working with folks at the highest level. My brother was one of the chief fundraisers for Barack Obama and helped get him elected president, not only in the first cycle, but also in the second cycle. My brother is an Obama appointee, and I have watched him successfully get Barack Obama elected. Third, we are working diligently to try to get Joe Biden elected. So I'm looking at this race both state level, which I'm running for, and nationally. Now let's talk about the endorsements. You are 100% correct. Those endorsements that you mentioned, some of them had even agreed to endorse me prior to my opponent getting in the race. When she got in the race, as you mentioned earlier, she had friends and prior experience. For example, you mentioned Ron Klein. Ron Klein is a longtime family friend of my family. However, I spoke with Representative Klein, or former Representative Klein, and he said, you know, she used to work for me, so I'm kind of have to give her my endorsement, and I respected that. However, I am getting as much grassroots support as you can possibly imagine. Everywhere I go, I'm going on a listening tour. I started in West Boca, and then I'm speaking with you in Sentry Village right now. I'm moving up to Delray, where I live, and then Boynton. And then last week, the district goes all the way up to Lake Okeechobee. I spent the week meeting with the mayors up in Belglade. So to answer your question, I'm going to give you two parts. Number one, I expect three major endorsements coming in the next few days. And number two, I believe the grassroots support behind me is enormous and far exceeds my opponent.
Okay. Who is your campaign manager? I had spoken to you about a week ago, and you told me you were in discussion. Are you comfortable with disclosing that at this point?
Oh, no, not only am I comfortable, I'm very pleased. We're using Rick Asnani and Jonathan Cooper from Cornerstone. They are a professional, top-notch organization, and I've been extremely pleased with their efforts, both in writing, the communication they're putting out to voters. I'm pleased with their communication with me. I'm pleased with their communication with important leaders in our community. They've done a bang-up job.
Okay, now, when I spoke to your opponent, Kelly Skidmore, recently, she told me that her campaign is being managed by Eric Johnson, and that he was originally going to be managing your campaign, and then he decided when she got in that she would switch over. What kind of message or signal does this send rather, when an established pro like Eric Johnson started with you and then bolted your campaign to go with your opponent? What can you tell us about that?
I think that's a great question. So let's start from the very beginning. In literally the room next door to where I'm sitting right now in my home office, I got a call in January 2020 from Eric Johnson. And Eric called me and he told me that that Senator Rader was going to retire and that Tina Polsky was going to run for his seat. I have known Eric since 1996 when he ran a campaign against a candidate against my father. And in fact, Eric trusted me so much that several years ago when he had a friend in trouble who needed legal assistance, he even retained me as the lawyer to help that person out. So I think there was a two-part answer. Number one, politics. Let's just be very clear about this. It's political. This is a former client of his. He has previously represented Kelly Skidmore, and I don't think that Mr. Johnson knew that she was interested in getting back in the race. And I think he felt a loyalty to her, even though he recruited me to run for this position. Secondly, he was concerned, as I mentioned earlier, that my brother is a very big donor to the Democratic Party, a fundraiser for the Democratic Party. He's an Obama appointee to the Holocaust Council. And I think that was a concern, that if my brother ran against Tina Polsky, that would have conflicted him out. So he made the decision that he did not want to lose revenue, and he made a financial decision to leave the race. To me, it couldn't have been the best nothing better could have happened to me. I ended up with the most fantastic election team. I have more than enough of my own personal money to run the race. And I think grassroots wise, I'm going to win this race.
Okay. All right. One thing that's in the news a lot lately, of course, is the COVID or coronavirus crisis. We're shifting gears a moment. What do you think about the recent spike in COVID-19 cases in several states, particularly Florida, which I think yesterday set a new record for new cases? Has the county or the state opened up too soon? And give us your view on that, please.
The answer is yes. We're opening up too soon. I have grave concerns for our senior community here in West Boca. Let me be clear. I have my great uncle, Uncle Dave, lives in the district. He lives in West Boca, and he's 94 years old, and he served in World War II, and he's concerned. I spoke to my aunt yesterday, and he's concerned for his life because if he leaves and he gets COVID at 94 years old, a World War II veteran, a disabled veteran, it could lead to his demise, and that's nothing we want. I think that we need to do everything we can to protect our seniors and our vulnerable citizens. I think we need to keep practicing social distancing. I think we need to be very careful when we open up the movie theaters and the restaurants. I think that we need to do it in phases, as the government has said, but I'm certainly not ready to let my family out of the house unnecessarily, outside of grocery shopping and everything like that. Most of my work, for example, I'm doing via Zoom, as we're doing right now. I'll give you an example. I just did a Zoom court hearing no less than an hour ago. And that safely protects me. It safely protects my family. It safely protects my great uncle who lives right down the street. And I'm doing everything I can. And I think we are opening a bit too early.
Now, speaking of family, tell us a little about your immediate family so that we can put this in better perspective. You have children?
I do. I'm married. My wife's name is Jennifer. I have a daughter. She's 9 years old. And in fact, my daughter attended Hebrew school at Temple Shalom, right at Sentry Village, at Rabbi Rader's synagogue there. So the Neshama Institute. My daughter, just until COVID, was going there for Hebrew school. Unfortunately, that had to end because of COVID, but that's where she went to Hebrew school. So I've actually recently spent a fair amount of time in Sentry Village going to services and family nights for my daughter. So I'm married to Jennifer. Her former name is Jennifer Lipkin, and we met and we've been married for 13 years, and our daughter is Daniela, and she's 9.
Okay. Now, I've heard a couple of shall we say, ethnic code words in your last answer. So obviously you're Jewish, and Sentry Village is predominantly Jewish. It used to be much higher percentage. We're becoming more diverse with each passing year. How important is it to be Jewish? And by the way, I asked your opponent this question, and she said, although she was not raised as a Jew, that she has about 50% Jewish ancestry. How important do you think is it to be identified as a Jew? And do you think it gives you an advantage in this race? Would you comment on that?
Well, let me say this. I was raised in a very traditional Jewish household. My grandmother on my mother's side came over from Riga, Latvia, and she married my grandfather, who was raised on the Lower East Side. In fact, when we were kids driving in the car, they used to speak Yiddish when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. I was bar mitzvahed, I was confirmed, I've studied in Israel multiple times, and I believe that I don't want to play identity politics and say I'm going to win because I'm Jewish. I want to say that being Jewish characterizes who I am. I've studied Torah at Chabad of Boca Raton with Rabbi Goppin. He's a close friend of mine. My daughter goes to Hebrew school. We live in a traditional Jewish household. So I don't believe that it's going to make or break this campaign, but I certainly think Torah and studying Judaism has helped establish who I am.
You're not Orthodox, by the way, are you?
No, we consider ourselves traditional. I think that's the best way to say it.
Okay. You mentioned Century Village a moment ago, and we, of course, we're a senior community. Can you think of three key issues or any number that you want to recite that are particularly resonant with seniors like us in Century Village?
Absolutely. So let's start with
COVID
care.
was one. We've already touched on that. In addition to that, got it.
All right. So let's first talk about adult care food programs. I think that seniors we need to ensure that our seniors are fed, and we need to make sure that they are getting the food services they need. That is a two-part approach. Let's talk about that. The first part approach is through the state of Florida, which funds adult care food program. The second part is I know Jewish Family Services has volunteers who will provide meals to seniors, and I think that that's an initiative that should be supported, and I think that's a state and local partnership. I also believe that there's nutritional education for older adults, so we need to make sure that not only are our seniors eating right, but I think that they're eating properly. I think that we also need to have the Older Americans Act make sure that our seniors are protected in every possible way. We need to make sure that there is proper law enforcement, make sure that there's no dangers to the community. And then the other thing is statewide Medicaid managed care. As you know, a lot of our citizens are on Medicaid, and we want to make sure that they can get the benefits they need. So those are three programs that are state funded, I think are very important.
Okay. The other big item that's been in the news lately is the police brutality cases. I was going to say case, but there's been a new one involving excessive or unjustified use of force by police officers in America against people of color. Do you have any view on that? Do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement marks a turning point in race relations in this country, or is it just going to be more of the same and then we're going to fall back into the same thing? How significant is this Black Lives movement, Matters movement, in your opinion?
Well, I believe that this is an area that I can give some very good insight on, and I'm somewhat of an expert because I've been involved in the criminal justice system for the past 20 years. And I believe that, and let me say this, I support our good, hardworking first responders. If you go into government service as a first responder, whether it's a paramedic or a firefighter or a police officer with the right intentions, I will support you in every possible way. I also think that the African American community has an absolute right to defend themselves in what's going on right now. And I think I'm keenly able to talk about that. So let me give you my response. We have, for my entire lifetime, 47 years, I have watched us try to fight racial injustice from the outside in. And what that means is when you have a gentleman by the name of George Floyd, and there's a police officer who holds his knee on this gentleman's neck for 9 minutes, and he's murdered, essentially, or not essentially, he's murdered. The problem is we've been fighting racism my entire life by prosecuting one offender for doing one crime. The issue is, why did we get there to begin with? And the reason being is we're not fighting racism from the inside out. We never should have gotten to the point where that man had a knee on his neck. What does that mean? And I can tell you, I have spoken to numerous members of the African American community because they make up a significant portion of this district. And this is what I'm hearing, and these are issues that I support. Number one, we have to have de-escalation training. We have to make sure as many events as we can do not end in violence, and that is proper training. Now, the response to that is, well, these officers are trained. Well, my response to that is train them harder. Make sure that every event is documented so we know exactly what's going on. Number two, I support the use of body cams. I want the folks to see what is going on in the world, so when we see racial injustice, we have proof of it. Number three, I would support the demilitarization of our police officers. I think that we can still have effective law enforcement, yet not dressed in combat fatigues and marked out vehicles, because that's going to only cause distrust in the African American community. And last but not least, and this is my last thing, I strongly support citizen review boards. I believe that not only if a police officer is held to their own department, but they're also held to the public, then that will cause them to think twice before they commit an unjust act.
Okay, good answer. Another movement in this country that's going on, that's connected to the Black Lives Matter movement, is the removing of statues and symbols of America's racist or slave past. Of course, America has two dirty secrets. One is that we took the land from the Indians, and the other is that we promoted and accepted slavery. Even the founding fathers, of course, are all being called to task on that. In today's Sun Sentinel, there's an article saying that the city of Plantation, which is in Broward County, that there's a movement to change the name because the people there, they're so used to it, they don't even realize it according to the article, but it does have a connotation with slavery and the South, the Civil War, and so on and so forth. Do you think that a city like Plantation should change its name because of what it represents? What's your opinion on it?
Well, the answer is I think that each city should be able to do what each city wants to do, and I think that each monument should be looked at individually. And if a city feels that there's a racial past in their residents, and I know that Plantation, for example, has an African-American population, if they're more comfortable changing their name, then they should have the right to do that. For example, I see the Confederate flag floating around. I see people marching with both the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag. And I know as a Jewish person, seeing a Nazi flag makes me uncomfortable. So if I was an African-American person, I think that seeing a Confederate flag would make me uncomfortable. And it's not changing history. You're not changing history. History, we still have books and research for that. I think that we should live in a society where we all feel comfortable. So if the city feels that that's an appropriate measure and the voters support it, I would support it as well.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned flag because that brings us to our next question. You recognize this?
I do.
That's the flag of the state of Florida. There are some who say that it is very suggestive of the Confederate flag. They both have the cross X, which they call a saltire or something like that. And others say it's just an X. Do you think that Florida should change the design of its flag to get away from this connotation with the Confederate flag? You may have heard, by the way, that NASCAR has banned Confederate flags. And what's your feeling on that as far as our flag? Do you think it should remain historically significant, or do you think we should change it to a new design? By the way, the detail of the flag is the seal of the state of Florida. And that, let me just see, I think I may have a better picture of that. Well, this was the original seal of the state of Florida. I apologize that it may be reading backwards because of the Zoom, but it was supposed to be a Native American throwing flowers. And some people say that this is just a reminder of the whole taking away of the land away from the Indians, the Seminoles in this case. Now, Florida did change the seal. They didn't feel the mountains were accurate. So the new seal is like this. They got rid of the mountain, but they still have what appears to be a Native American Indian throwing flowers. So what do you think of that? Do you think that it's time to revamp these symbols which represent a painful reminder of the past?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to speak to the communities that are affected. And one of the things that I think is my strongest suit, especially being an attorney, is that I hear from people every single day, and then I fight for what they believe in, and if it's the right cause. I would obviously be open to listening to both leaders of the African American community and leaders from the Indian community, and I'd hear what they have to say. So to be candid, I think that that is an issue that I would look into. I don't have a firm answer on it, yes or no yet, because I'd want to hear from those communities before I make that decision. Just real briefly, as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe in glossing over history or erasing history, but I'm certainly willing to evolve.
Okay. Now, the district you're running for, I hope you're not leasing your car because you're going to be putting a lot of miles on it if you're elected, or maybe I should say when you're elected. Of course, it runs the gamut from the wealthy people of West Boca and Delray and the poorer areas of the county, such as Pahokee and up at the Glades area. One of the key issues that I've been focused on since I moved down here, which I moved down here essentially for my health, and I'm a bicyclist and I like to ride. When I came down here, I noticed during about 6 months of the year this horrible burning smell in the air periodically. And upon investigation, I found out that it was largely due to pre-harvest burns of sugarcane. Now, your district, of course, if elected, will include a part of the sugarcane growing area, which is on the south shore of Lake Okeechobee. And you may be aware that there is a lawsuit. Senator Abruzzo, who is temporarily out of public office, he will be back in January, is partnered with Berman Law, and there's a class action lawsuit against many of the sugar growers. Now, I understand that sugar is a vital, important part of Florida economy. It's bigger than all the other crops put together. And I'd be the last person to say that we should not have a sugar industry. And of course, a lot of your future constituents, if you're elected, will now do and will continue to earn a living in the sugar fields. But there is a thing called green harvest. Green harvest means instead of burning the field to remove the leaf, you remove it either by a machete, which is the old-fashioned way, or they have machines now that can do that. And this will prevent the burning of the leaf. The leaf is the undesirable part of the sugar. What do you know about this issue? And when you go up to the Glades, what will you tell the people that you're seeking their vote for? Do you think that they should be protected from sugar burns, or do you think that eliminating sugar burns would be a threat to their livelihood? Let me hear your feeling about that. This is an environmental question, obviously.
Absolutely. Look, I consider myself an environmentalist, but not to the point where I'm going to interrupt what is Florida's most vital economic impact, and that's agriculture. And let's also not forget that not only do they grow sugarcane, but the crop rotation there also includes staple ingredients such as rice and corn. You know, and while I hear you loud and clear, I've grown up in Florida and I've smelled the burn my whole life. I also know that because of the economic impact that it brings, that it is a cost-effective measure in order to make sure that we can grow effectively. That's number one. So at this point, I am not vocally opposed to the burn. I feel that we need to work together with the sugar industry as best as we possibly can, because it has a vital impact on the state of Florida. It creates jobs. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of people who work for the machine union, for example, there. We've got people who work for the sugar industry. We have the farmers, we have the co-op. So I don't think that we can just automatically stop something. That's number one. Number two, we're forgetting something. The Florida Crystals, for example, is taking some of the byproduct of what they're doing, and they're actually using it for environmental saving. Let me give you an example. You go to a restaurant, you order styrofoam, you order takeout, it comes in styrofoam. You throw that styrofoam in the ocean, that will sit there for 1,000 years and will not break up. If with the new containers and plates that they're making out of the sugarcane byproduct, it is 90 days certified to biodegrade. So we're actually, if you look at it from a carbon footprint standpoint, you actually may have an evening out. And I don't think that's something that we've discussed. So I believe that, and there's one last thing that we have to talk about. We have to talk about costs. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And if we start taking measures that can effectively raise staple crops, the prices, right now we're talking about getting food to seniors. And if the prices go up when our economy is faltering, how are they going to afford staple foods like rice and corn? And last but not least, they grow greens there as well. Lettuce, Fresh Express is there. So don't just talk about sugar. There's a lot of other environmental, a lot of other things that are grown out there.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, but sugar, in my view, cannot really be equated with rice and corn, which are filled with lots of good nutrients. Sugar doesn't contain any protein or minerals or vitamins. It's strictly really a flavoring agent. It makes foods taste better, for sure. We all like ice cream. I do. But you can live your life very well. In fact, some say very healthfully without ever adding any sugar to your diet. And many people have chosen to do that. But be that aside, the movement toward green harvest, which Brazil and Australia have already adopted years ago, because of the environmental harm caused by all of the smoke and particles that are released in these controlled burns of sugarcane, is actually, or could be, more labor intensive than we have now. So that would like add jobs. Now, obviously it would be at a cost, and that cost would be profit to the sugar industry. So which do you think is more important in keeping the sugar industry profitable? And I believe they enjoy something like a $4 billion with a B dollar subsidy from the federal government. Do you think that's more important than the health of the people in the Glades community and their property values, which have been impacted by the settling ash, and their cars have been lowered in value? You can't sell a home there. Don't you think you owe it to that community that you will represent to do something to protect their health and property values?
Fred, you can do both. You can absolutely do both. You can work with, and I understand you're talking about the sugar industry's profit margin, and I understand that, but I don't think that you cut off your nose to spite your face. I think that you can work with the sugar industry to make sure that the environmental impact is as minimal as possible. I also think that you can bring good resources and bring, allocation, bring earmarks back to your district. And if you can find the right balance between both agriculture and the environment, then you're doing an effective job as a legislator. I hear you loud and clear that there is issues with the burning process, but there's issues with anything that you do. And as we talked just a moment ago about adding costs, that's number one. And number two, let's discuss this. I heard you also discuss, sugar may not be necessary in your diet. As a legislator, I'm not going to, I believe in freedom. And if someone wants to order a piece of cheesecake when they go to Ben's Deli and they want it to taste like sugar and they want to have whipped cream on top that's sweet, I'm not going to get in their way of that. So I think that that's their right as an American to have a dessert every now and then, or maybe a soda if they want to.
By the way, I don't think they'd serve whipped cream at Ben's Deli. I think they're kosher, but unless it was artificial.
No, you know what I meant. I just meant something sweet on top.
Right. Staying with environment for a moment, let's talk about development in Palm Beach County, especially in South Florida. Now, you live on Lyons Road. How long have you?
I do. I've lived in Florida almost my entire life because I went to school. I went to school at the University of Florida and Nova Southeastern University. I'm a product of the public school system here in South Florida. And we were living in Central Boca. And back in about 2014, when they started doing all the building here on Lyons Road, that was a decision that my wife and I made. We had a young daughter at the time that we wanted to raise her in a beautiful community. And we moved into the district back in 2015. And we've been here ever since.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that. I live in just south of you. I like the neighborhood too. So what I was getting at is you've seen in the last 4 or 5 years a tremendous increase in development. Just north of you, there's the bridges, and then there's Boca Bridges. To the south of Sentry Village on Glades Road, there's a shop and dine community called Uptown Boca on 95th Avenue near Home Depot on Glades. And that's under construction right now. It's going to add 454 units in this area. We've already got tremendous problems with traffic. Obviously, this is paradise. I moved down here because I wanted to live in paradise. And the boomers, as they age, they're seeing Florida. Florida is booming in population. I understand we have to put the people somewhere. But what do you think about all this overdevelopment? Do you think it's ultimately healthy for the county, or do you think it's going to destroy the lifestyle? And one thing I want you to think about is we're going to be moving into some extreme weather. We're in hurricane season now. The rainstorms seem to get more frequent and bigger in intensity. As we remove dirt areas and replace them with parking lots and developments, there's less ways for the ground to soak up this water. Do you think we're on a collision course with nature? And what's your feeling about that? Should we try to slow down the development here?
Well, that's a very, very complex question, Fred, with a lot of different variables to it. So let's backtrack a little bit. First, let's talk about why are people moving here? And I agree with you, it's paradise. I've lived here my whole life, and I have my choice of living anywhere in the country. And not just because mom and dad live here, my brother lives here with his wife and his 2 children. I live here because I love it here, and I've always loved it here. But why are people moving here? Well, let's talk about what our president did when he first got elected. And that is, you know, he took away the ability to write off some of your interest. And a lot of folks who were being overtaxed in the Northeast started to move down here because it was just, there's no state income tax here. And it's just an easier lifestyle when you're not paying as much in taxes. I don't necessarily believe in building out. I believe in building up and rebuilding areas that you have the ability to build on. But I also think, and as you said, there's an environmental price and there's an economic price. So who pays that price? Well, I think that if you are going to develop, you know, I live in a GL home, and I know that GL works, you know, in a public-private partnership to make sure that the classroom sizes are not overgrown. If you're going to be building more residential communities, we have to make sure we keep building schools. And I also believe that we have to work with the Department of Transportation to make sure that our roads can handle it. Now, as far as an environmental impact, I mean, that's something I would have to speak with, you know, the appropriate state agencies to see what it would do. And if there was a project that I felt would hurt the environment, I would certainly not support that. But if it was environmental neutral or had no carbon footprint, then I would believe in building up and not building out.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that. There was an article recently in Florida Politics, which is an online political column. And I want to read just a paragraph from it, and I'll ask you to comment. This was written by the publisher, I believe it's Peter Schorsch, and it was published on June 1st. And it says, Michael Weinstein, you, a lifelong friend and sometimes lawyer of Charlie Adelson, suspected co-conspirator in the murder of Tallahassee law professor Dan Markle. Innocent till proven guilty is a tenet of law, but does not require the elimination of good judgment or the intentional miscarriage of justice either. Only a person who feels multiple powerful connections protect their family can impede the investigation of her ex-husband's murder, tell flagrant lies on the stand, and then say with smug confidence, quote, the state isn't going to arrest me. The election of Michael Weinstein, and again, this is Peter Schorsch speaking, the columnist, would no doubt bolster this type of confidence. It could further obstruct the future progress of a bill Senator Jeff Brandes filed last year to create access to family courts for families like the Markells, who got cut off from visitation with children after a parent's murder. Now, I understand there may be some privileged conversations that, you know, you can't really talk about, but this obviously is a negative issue, and you should be willing to at least deal with it and give your side of the story. Can we have your comment on this association with the Adelsons?
Oh, certainly. Well, first of all, there's no side of the story. I'm a lawyer. I mean, I am a board certified by the Florida Bar criminal trial expert. This is what I do for a living. And, you know, I don't have any proof of it, but I have strong feelings that my opponent and or her team, you know, had some influence on that article. Again, I don't have proof of that, but that's just my theory. So let's discuss this. I'm a lawyer, and I had a friend of mine, a lifelong friend of mine, come to me for legal services. And I agreed to help my friend in a time of need. And I represented that person for a period of time. Because they were a close friend at the time, I suggested to them that let me help you through a transition until you can hire another lawyer, and that's exactly what happened. That article is exactly like Donald Trump. It takes the Constitution and it throws it in the toilet and it flushes the toilet. We are entitled to our 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. You are entitled to your right to counsel, you are entitled to remain silent, and you are entitled to not testify and not be subject to cross-examination. So I did absolutely everything professionally. I did everything by the book. I did everything any board-certified criminal trial attorney would do. I'm a former prosecutor. This is what I do for a living. I'm an attorney. Someone came to me in a time of need and I assisted them. That article was suggesting that because I helped a client who may have had bad motives, that somehow impugns my integrity. I think that's hogwash, and they can take that and they can throw it away with the Constitution, which is what they've done.
Now you mentioned a client. Are you still representing the defendant or the accused in this case?
No, in fact, he was never a defendant, nor was he ever accused. He was a suspect in a case who came to me for legal counsel, and I represented him for a short period of time. He has not been charged, was not indicted, and I ended that representation because I felt it would be better, because we did have a relationship as friends, that he hire another lawyer, which is what he did. There was no other reason other than we had a previous relationship. I felt it best to move on from that friendship. We haven't spoken in a couple of years because I just felt it best to cut ties with that situation, and that's what I did. But I believe that article was solely meant to impugn my integrity, but it fails to realize that I'm an attorney doing my job.
All right. Now, this case, of course, this is a Tallahassee case, and it's a fairly old case. Just very briefly, I think it had to do with a marital breakup and visitation. The wife wanted to move to the Miami area, and the husband didn't want that because it would have hindered the visitation. And supposedly there were some hired killers. I think some of them, or one or two of them, have been convicted. Can you just tell us what is the status of that case now? Who's been convicted? Who's charged? And just to summarize, what do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I mean, look, it's really not fair or even appropriate for me to comment on what the prosecution is going to do at this point in time. I have not been involved in the case in several years. As I mentioned earlier, it's no different than if I'm an expert in cancer and your best friend comes to you and says, I have cancer, you're not going to turn away one of your best friends, you know, someone who stood up for you in the wedding. You're going to help them. And if it gets too close to home, then what you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, I'm going to recommend another doctor. And that's all that happened in this particular case. So, and as far as what's going on, I'll let the prosecutors do what they need to do.
Okay, very good. I've concluded the formal part of the interview, and I'd like to give you now an opportunity to make a closing statement on any subject or any topic about what you think your chance of getting elected or what your strategy is, and so on and so forth. You have the floor. Take your time.
Thanks, Fred. Well, first of all, let me thank you. Let me thank the Village Sentry for hearing me. I think your questions were very well thought out, very well researched, and very well articulated. And I think that they talked about a lot of issues in the district, and I think that they also discussed some things about me and my background, because you obviously looked into it. So I appreciate that. So let me just tell the voters who I am. I'm Michael Weinstein. I am 47 years old. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I am a former prosecutor. In fact, I led my county in number of jury trials in the early 2000s. It just shows you what a tough litigator I am. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I have always been a lifelong Democrat. I've voted ever since I can vote, starting at the age of 18. I registered as a Democrat when I was 17 years old, I believe, because you could do pre-registration at the time. And I've always voted as a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat. I support our democratic values. I support assault weapons bans. I support a woman's right to choose. I support Medicare expansion. I would do everything I can to protect both communities that you mentioned. We have three distinct communities the way I see it in this particular district. We have the senior community, which is in West Boca and Sentry Village and Whisperwalk. We have the GL homes and the residential suburban communities up along Lyons Road and West Del Rey. We have the communities in West Point, which has also got a high level of seniors. And then when you travel further north, you have a large minority population and an agriculture community. I think that I am absolutely the right bridge between all of those communities. I grew up here. I was educated here. I have a family with a history of service. I would be remiss if I did not mention my mother, Dr. Barbara Weinstein. My mother, Barbara Weinstein, she ran an agency called Family Central for 30 years here in South Florida. And what that did was have child welfare services for the entire Tri-County area, whether it be foster care or child care or even food during Thanksgiving. Family Central did it all. And in fact, they had the contract up in Belle Glade. So my family has a history of service going to Belle Glade ever since I'm a child. So I know about this particular district. I think that my opponent, she was formerly in the legislature over a decade ago. She has run twice. I mean, we talked about, for example, a case that I did that caused some media attention. My opponent has run twice for election in 2 other districts. She has lost her 2 previous elections. The electorate has spoken on what they think about her and her record, and the fact that, in my understanding, she never passed a bill in Tallahassee. Not one bill was ever passed by her. So I think that both of us, although we may vote for the Democratic Party, I think the voters of Sentry Village are going to figure out who's going to represent them and be the better fighter, and that's what I am. I'm a litigator, I'm a fighter, I'm a listener, and I can understand policy. Thank you, Fred.
Okay, before we sign off, do you have a website for your election campaign?
I do. We have a Facebook page, Michael D. Weinstein Facebook page, and we also have WeinsteinForStatehouse.com. WeinsteinForStatehouse.com. Yes, sir.
And on Facebook, what would they type in to find you? Just your name, Michael Weinstein?
Michael Weinstein for House of Representatives, District 81. They type that in, they'll find it right away.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for your courtesy and your preparation for this interview. Once again, this is Fred Hadley reporting for the Village Sentry in Sentry Village, Boca Raton, Florida. And we just concluded our interview with Michael Weinstein, a first-time candidate for major office in Florida. And he's running for District 81 State Representative against Kelly Skidmore in the primary. And then, of course, the winner of that will probably face a Republican in November. Once again, primary day is August 18th. The early voting starts about 2 weeks prior to that. You can get a vote by mail ballot. Just call up 561-656-6200. And no matter who you want to vote for, it's important that you vote this year. Of course, they say that every year, but I think with what's going on in the country, the state, with the COVID, we really need good people representing us. And I think, Michael, if you're elected, you're well qualified, and if you do get elected, I look forward to reaching out to you for any problems that we have in Sentry Village. So thank you again for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay.